Life, you know, has a funny way of flipping the script when you least expect it. There I was, ringing up groceries at the local store, living paycheck to paycheck with Jack, my husband. He's a mechanic, grease-stained hands, a warm smile, and a heart so big it makes the sun look like a dime. We were scraping by, sure, but we had love, or so I thought. Then came the day that shook my mundane existence to its core. The store got a new boss, Tom. Charismatic? Understatement of the century. The man could sell sand to a desert. He took an interest in me, or my work, I first thought. But there was something more in those glances, something that whispered promises of a life beyond the cashier's counter. I resisted. Oh, how I resisted. I told myself it was the stability, the attention, maybe even the slight uptick in my hours that drew me to him, not Tom himself. But who was I kidding? It was all Tom. His success, his confidence, it was intoxicating. For a girl who counted pennies to make rent, it felt like breathing rarefied air for the first time. And so, I fell. I justified it as a fling, a brief escape from the relentless press of bills and the ever-present hum of financial anxiety. It's just temporary, I lied to myself, even as I slipped further away from the life I had built with Jack. Jack. Sweet, oblivious Jack. Or so I thought. Men like him, they see more than they let on. He started piecing it together. My late nights, at work, the sudden, inexplicable improvements in our finances. And then, the mistake that brought it all crashing down. A text, meant for Tom, that landed like a grenade in Jack's hands. The confrontation was inevitable. The hurt in Jack's eyes, a hurt I put there, cut deeper than any words could. He laid it out plain and simple, him or Tom. In that moment, blinded by the glitter of a life I thought I wanted, I made my choice. I'm sorry, Jack. My voice trailed off, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Save it. I hope he's worth it, Jack said, the finality in his voice a sharp break from the warmth I'd fallen in love with. And just like that, he was gone. My husband, my partner, the man who had been my rock, walked out of our life, leaving me to the tempest I had chosen. As the door clicked shut behind him, the silence it left was deafening. I stood there, caught between the life I had and the one I thought I wanted, the weight of my choices pressing down on me like never before. You'd think choosing between a rock and a hard place would be easy until you're the one stuck in the middle. There I was, living a life that felt like it was scripted for someone else. A part-time cashier gig at the local grocery store was hardly the dream job, but it paid some of the bills. My husband, Jake, a mechanic with grease-stained hands and a heart of gold, made the rest of our modest life bearable. We were two nobodies in the grand scheme of things, but together, we were something. Then came the whirlwind, Mr. Charisma, my new boss. He was everything my mundane life wasn't: exciting, affluent, and intoxicatingly attentive. My initial hesitation about his advances faded as quickly as my resolve. The affair began, a secret escape from the financial quicksand we were sinking into. Jake noticed. How could he not? The late nights, the unexplained absences, the scent of another man's cologne that clung to my clothes like a guilty shadow. He found the evidence, a mistakenly sent text that shattered the fragile illusion I'd built around us. The confrontation was inevitable. Is it true? Jake's voice was a mixture of hurt and disbelief. The weight of his gaze was too much. I confessed, the words tumbling out in a chaotic mess of tears and whispered apologies. He gave me an ultimatum: end the affair or end our marriage. The choice should have been simple, but the allure of escape from our financial struggles clouded my judgment. I chose my boss, believing his promises of a better life. Jake left that night. The sound of the door closing behind him echoed like a final verdict. Relief and guilt waged war in my chest, but I told myself it was for the best. Life with my boss was a dizzying high at first. Lavish dinners, expensive gifts, and the illusion of security. I was living the life I thought I wanted, but the sheen of luxury began to fade, revealing the cage it truly was. My boss's affection came with strings attached. His control extended beyond the office, isolating me from the world I knew. Friends and family became distant memories, replaced by a suffocating silence. It was then I realized the golden cage I'd traded my old life for. Jake's departure, once a relief, now felt like the moment I'd lost everything that mattered. I was trapped, not by my circumstances, but by the choices I'd made. The realization was a bitter pill, one that no amount of luxury could sweeten. As the isolation grew, so did my regret. The life I'd chosen was nothing more than a beautifully wrapped lie, one that I had eagerly opened. My boss, once a symbol of escape, had become my jailer, his affection conditional on my obedience. I missed Jake, our simple life, and the love we shared, unadorned but genuine. The contrast was stark, a reminder of what I'd sacrificed for a mirage of happiness. The narrative of my life had taken a turn I never anticipated, leading me down a path of loss and realization. It was a journey marked by the choices we make and the things we value. In seeking a way out of one prison, I had unknowingly locked myself into another. The cost of my freedom, it turned out, was everything that truly mattered. The minute the door clicked shut behind him, I felt it, the cold, gnawing void of regret. My breath hitched, heart pounding like it wanted to break free from the cage of my ribs and chase after the life I had just thrown away. I sank onto the edge of the bed we once shared, the bed that now felt as vast and empty as the hole inside me. What have I done? The words whispered past my lips, a fragile echo in the silence of my apartment. Life with him, my boss-turned-lover, kicked off like a fairy tale on steroids. Fancy dinners, surprise getaways, gifts I'd only ever seen in glossy magazine pages. He had this way of making me feel like I was the center of his universe. But as the novelty wore off, the glitter began to fade, revealing the grim reality beneath. It was in the small things, like how his texts became commands rather than suggestions, or the way his eyes narrowed slightly when I talked about visiting my sister. Control, subtle and suffocating, replaced affection. Then came the day that turned my already topsy-turvy world inside out. He had stepped out, leaving his phone on the kitchen counter. It buzzed, a message lighting up the screen. Curiosity overcame me, and what I saw was a punch to the gut. "We need to deal with this, now." Read the message, beneath it a picture that sent chills down my spine. A photo taken in shadows, but unmistakably of him, handing a thick envelope to a figure that screamed trouble. I confronted him when he returned, the photo burning a hole in my pocket. His reaction was a cocktail of anger and fear. "It's not what you think," he started, but the lies stumbled over his tongue, clumsy and transparent. He admitted to it all, the blackmail, the illegal side hustles, the danger we were now both in. And then, as if betrayal was a gift that kept on giving, he laid out his plan. A plan that involved me, a late-night meet, and a briefcase full of money to silence the threat. I agreed, driven by a mix of fear and a desperate need to cling to the wreckage of our relationship. But as I handed over the briefcase to a shadowy figure in a dimly lit parking lot, the truth hit me. This wasn't just about silencing a threat. It was a test of loyalty, one I failed the moment I saw the look in the blackmailer's eyes. A look that said he knew me, knew us, and this was far from over. The betrayal, however, wasn't just his to claim. As I slinked back to our shared space, the silence greeted me like an unwelcome guest. It was then I saw it, the evidence of his infidelity, as blatant as the morning sun. A pair of earrings, expensive and definitely not mine, casually discarded on his nightstand. That night, I lay awake, the bed a battlefield of sheets and shattered illusions. I missed my husband, his steady presence, his unwavering love. I longed for the simplicity of our life before, the small apartment, the laughter-filled dinners after long days, the comfort of knowing love didn't need the embellishment of wealth to thrive. The realization was a cold shower, jolting me awake to the mess I'd made. But it was the mysterious figure, a ghost from my lover's past, that turned my regret into dread. The blackmailer was just the beginning, a pawn in a much larger game of crime and punishment. My lover, the man I chose over a life of simple happiness, was not just unfaithful, he was dangerous. As dawn crept through the curtains, casting a pale light on the remnants of my choices, I knew one thing for sure. I was in too deep, and the only way out was through. But at what cost? Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying the video so far. If you do, please take a moment to hit that like button. It really helps me out and lets me know you appreciate the content. Also, if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel. Subscribing is a great way to stay updated with all the latest videos and to be part of our growing community. It's quick, it's free, and it ensures you won't miss out on any upcoming content. So go ahead, smash that like button and hit subscribe. Your support means a lot and keeps this channel going. Thanks for watching. The moment I realized I had nothing left was the same moment I knew I couldn't leave. Trapped in a golden cage, each luxury around me mocked my predicament. My heart ached for escape, for a return to simplicity, to a life where love wasn't laced with deceit. But how do you flee when every step is watched, every breath monitored? Meanwhile, the world didn't stop. Somewhere out there, he was moving on, my husband. The thought gnawed at me, a constant reminder of what I'd lost. Through whispers and fleeting glances, I heard of his transformation. He wasn't the man I left behind. He had grown, flourished even, without me. It stung, knowing I was the anchor that had once held him back. Then, fate played its cruel hand, thrusting us into an unexpected encounter. I saw him, truly saw him, for the first time since our worlds had diverged. There was a lightness to him, a happiness that radiated. He was thriving, surrounded by new friends, a stark contrast to the isolation my life had become. The sight of him, so content and fulfilled, was a blade through my already fractured heart. In that moment, he shared a truth that cut even deeper. He had known about the darkness I had entangled myself with. Before the chasm had widened between us, he had tried to warn me, to save me from the precipice I was blindly dancing on. His words, once dismissed, echoed with haunting clarity. I saw the signs, tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen. The regret in his eyes mirrored my own, a shared sorrow for what might have been. Fueled by guilt and a desperate need for redemption, I made a decision. If I couldn't reclaim the life I'd lost, I could at least dismantle the one I was trapped in. Plotting revenge against the man who had seduced me into this nightmare became my sole focus. Night after night, I sifted through emails, documents, anything that could serve as evidence of his criminal undertakings. Each piece I unearthed was a step closer to liberation, not just for me, but for the unsuspecting lives he was poised to ruin. But gathering evidence was only half the battle. I had to confront him, had to let him know I was no longer the pawn in his twisted game. The day I decided to face him, my heart raced with a cocktail of fear and determination. I know everything, I declared, my voice steady despite the tremors that threatened to betray my facade. And I'm not afraid to go to the police. His reaction was a blend of disbelief and rage, a dangerous volatility that confirmed I had made the right choice. But as I stood my ground, something shifted within me. It wasn't just about revenge or exposing his crimes. It was about reclaiming my sense of self, about shedding the skin of the woman I had become under his influence. The confrontation was a point of no return, a line crossed that there was no stepping back from. I had ignited a war, not just against him but against the part of myself that had allowed this descent into darkness. As I walked away from him that day, my steps were unsteady but resolute. I was no longer the woman trapped in a golden cage. I was a storm, ready to reclaim my sky. In a moment that split my life into before and after, he made his intentions crystal clear. Expose me, and it's not just your job you'll lose, he hissed, the menace in his voice wrapping around me like a vice. The cold, hard edge of reality cut through me then. This was no longer about a shattered marriage or a ruined career. This was about survival. Panic clawed at my insides, but it was the sharp sting of betrayal that fueled my next move. I knew I had to leave, to disappear before his threats materialized into something far more sinister. But where does one even begin when every part of your life is intertwined with the person you fear the most? That's when he appeared, the mysterious stranger, as if conjured by my desperation. I can get you out, he offered, his voice a mix of gravel and silk. But I want in on whatever you've got on him. Trusting him wasn't an option, but did I have a choice? His offer was a lifeline, and I was drowning. We planned it meticulously, every detail scrutinized to ensure nothing could go wrong. But life has a cruel way of reminding us that we're not in control. Just when I thought I was free, ready to hand over the damning evidence of my boss's crimes, the stranger vanished into the night, taking everything with him. I was left with nothing, no evidence, no ally, and no plan. The harsh light of dawn brought with it the painful realization of my folly. I had chosen ambition over love, greed over loyalty, and now, I was paying the price. My heart ached for my husband, for the life we had, so ordinary yet filled with a richness I now craved. With a heavy heart, I tried to reclaim pieces of my old life, seeking solace in familiarity. But when I reached out, hoping to grasp something, anything that felt like home, I found emptiness. My job was no longer mine, the apartment we shared had new occupants, and the life I left behind had moved on without me. In that moment, the full weight of my choices bore down on me. I had been so captivated by the allure of a life I thought I wanted that I didn't realize what I was sacrificing until it was too late. The man I married, who had stood by me through every up and down, had been my anchor, and in my blindness, I had cast him aside. Now, I stand at the precipice of a new beginning, one I must navigate alone. The road ahead is uncertain, paved with the hard lessons of my past. But it's a path I must walk, one step at a time, carrying the burden of my decisions and the hope of redemption. The journey back to myself won't be easy, but perhaps, in the end, I'll find a semblance of the peace I so recklessly threw away. The world didn't stop the day I realized I'd lost everything. It just kept spinning, indifferent to my descent. There I was, clutching my phone with shaky hands, the dial tone mocking me as I waited for him to pick up. The husband I'd betrayed, the one I'd left for a mirage of a better life. Please, I whispered into the phone, a plea for forgiveness, for a second chance at the life I'd so foolishly discarded. But the silence on the other end was a clear, unyielding rejection. He had moved on, and why shouldn't he? I had made my choice, and now, I was living with the consequences. The news of my boss's arrest came not long after, a brief sensation that stirred the city. Embezzlement, fraud, a litany of crimes that should have shocked me, but all I could think was, without me, without my foolishness, would he have been caught sooner? I watched from a distance, the empire we had built together crumbling to dust, the luxurious life I had chosen over love, over loyalty, evaporating like a mirage in the desert sun. And then, there was nothing. No job, no friends, no semblance of the life I had known. The apartment we shared, once a symbol of my betrayal, was taken from me, leaving me adrift in a city that felt as cold and unwelcoming as my prospects. I wandered the streets, the harsh reality of my decisions weighing me down like chains. The cafes we used to visit, the park where we walked hand in hand, all reminders of a life I could never have back. Desperation drove me to take any job that would have me, menial tasks that barely paid enough to keep me fed. I was a ghost, moving through the world unnoticed, unwanted. The nights were the hardest, the loneliness a tangible presence in the tiny, cramped room I now called home. I would lie awake, the echoes of my past mistakes haunting me, the faces of those I'd hurt a constant, unrelenting procession in my mind's eye. There were moments, dark and despairing, when I contemplated the end. When the pain of living with my choices seemed too much to bear. But even in my darkest hour, some stubborn spark within me refused to be extinguished. I couldn't undo the past, but I refused to let it define my future. So, I fought. Every day, I fought to survive, to find some sliver of hope in a world that seemed determined to break me. I took job after job, saving every penny, every scrap of dignity I could muster. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a slow, painstaking climb from the abyss into which I had fallen. And as I struggled to rebuild my life from the ashes of my choices, I learned. I learned the value of honesty, of integrity, of the love and trust I had so carelessly thrown away. The journey was far from over, the road ahead uncertain and fraught with challenges. But I was determined to face it head on, to make amends, not through words, but through actions. To prove, if only to myself, that redemption was possible, that even the gravest mistakes could be the first painful steps toward a better, truer life. In the end, it wasn't the fall that defined me, but how I chose to rise from it. The path to redemption was long and arduous, fraught with setbacks and heartbreak. But it was mine to walk, a chance to reclaim my soul from the depths of despair. And perhaps, one day, find forgiveness, not from the ones I'd wronged, but from the person who needed it most, myself. The moment I stepped off the bus into the bustling streets of a city that promised anonymity, my heart was a frantic drumbeat echoing the urgency of a fresh start. This is it, I murmured to myself, clutching my single suitcase tighter. No looking back now. The air was thick with possibilities, tainted only by the shadow of my past mistakes. Finding a modest job was my first victory. The manager at a small cafe barely glanced at my hastily fabricated resume before nodding me towards the counter. "You start tomorrow," he said, distracted by the lunchtime rush. I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could carve out a semblance of a life here. But as days blurred into weeks, the weight of loneliness settled in, heavy and unyielding. I was a ghost among the living, my interactions limited to the exchange of pleasantries with customers and the occasional nod to my neighbor in the adjacent apartment. The past, however, refused to remain buried. It lurked in the shadows of my new life, a constant reminder of the person I used to be. I avoided making friends, fearful that any connection could unravel the fragile peace I'd found. My past was a Pandora's box I dared not open, but it haunted me, seeping into my dreams and leaving me restless. The isolation was a double-edged sword, providing safety but cutting deep with its relentless solitude. Then, one ordinary Tuesday, as I scrolled through social media, a photo stopped me cold. There he was, my ex-husband, looking happier and more vibrant than I'd ever seen him, with a woman who radiated warmth, her hand resting lightly on his arm. They were announcing their engagement. The sight of it shattered the last vestige of hope I harbored for reconciliation, for a chance to right my wrongs. He had moved on, building a life that no longer had room for me. That night, as I lay awake in my bed, the four walls of my small apartment felt like a prison. I had chosen this solitude, this exile from everything and everyone I had once held dear. The realization was a bitter pill, leaving a taste of regret that no amount of wishing could wash away. My reflections were brutally interrupted weeks later when he found me, the boss whose charm had once blinded me to his true nature. His release had been a whisper in the wind, one I hadn't caught until he was standing in front of me, fury in his eyes. You thought you could start over? Without paying for what you did? His voice was a venomous hiss, a stark reminder of the danger I thought I'd escaped. The confrontation was a blur of fear and adrenaline. I managed to evade him, fleeing into the maze of city streets, my heart pounding a frantic escape rhythm. That night, I didn't return to my apartment, too terrified to lead him back to the only safe haven I had. Living in the shadow of fear became my new normal. Every step outside was weighted with the possibility of running into him again, of not being so lucky next time. My existence was reduced to a series of calculated risks, each day a gamble I wasn't sure I'd win. As I stand now, gazing out at the city that offered me a second chance, I can't help but feel the irony of my situation. I sought freedom but found a different kind of prison. My choices, born from a desire to escape a life of mediocrity, have led me here, to a life shadowed by regret and fear. The realization is sharp, a clarity that cuts through the fog of my denial. I understand now that my downfall was not just a consequence of my actions but a result of the choices I made, each one leading me further away from redemption. My attempt to outmaneuver my past only ensnared me deeper in its web. So, here I am, living a life marked by the constant look over my shoulder, waiting for the past to catch up. The dramatic conclusion of my story is not one of triumph but a testament to the irrevocable loss and harsh reality of my decisions. In the end, I am left with the understanding that some choices, once made, can never be undone, and the price of those choices is a life lived in the shadow of what could